Hi everyone, Siobhan here. It is week 41 and I've been sick for the past week, so hopefully my voice is okay as we go through this. This week's teaching is on transforming our anger into art. And I think this is really timely because as women, we have a lot of reasons to be really angry right now, especially if we're living in the United States. And I think for a lot of us, it's really challenging to figure out how to work with our anger in a effective and appropriate way without feeling like we're being silenced in some way. And so I think it's really important that we spend time really looking more closely at what our anger is actually trying to tell us. What is it trying to communicate to us? And also recognizing when our anger is becoming a distraction to really doing the work that we need to do. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what anger is actually covering. In my experience, anger generally is covering two different things. In some circumstances, our anger is a cover for feeling hurt. In some way, maybe we've had a disagreement with somebody and our feelings have been hurt, but the emotion that's more readily accessible or easier for us to access, the one that's closer to the surface for us, is actually our anger, not those hurt feelings. And it often feels easier for us to express anger than it does for us to express feeling hurt, because feeling hurt then means, one, we have to reveal that we're vulnerable. Hey, that hurt. And that vulnerability translates as, if you know that you hurt me, then that means you also know you can hurt me again. So we kind of collectively, I think, all human beings avoid letting others know when we've been hurt. And anger is a more acceptable and easier to access emotion. So that's one way that anger can act as a cover. The second way that anger acts as a cover is that it's covering up what our values are. That in some way, a boundary has been crossed. Something that we feel morally, ethically aligned with, we feel strongly about, we believe in. Somehow that boundary has been crossed, and that's what elicits our anger. And so the anger is in response to saying, hey, back off. You've crossed the line with me. I'm not willing to go there with you, or I'm not willing to buy into that. Or this is where I draw the line between what you're doing and what I'm doing. So when we think about anger as a cover, anger becomes a very powerful teacher for us and a powerful ally, because it's letting us know when we're at our most vulnerable, and it's also letting us know what's most meaningful to us. We don't generally get angry about things that don't matter to us. You know, we don't waste our time getting upset about things that aren't really important to us in the grand scheme of things. Or we don't waste our time getting angry with people that we don't really care about, right? We tend to get angry with the people we love the most. So our anger is this powerful ally that we really want to try to establish a relationship with that is healthy and supportive, expressive, and also creative is what I would say. And so this is why I feel like the big challenge we're facing as individuals and collectively is, how do we take all this anger that we're feeling, all this rage at the injustices that we're seeing happening around the world, either to ourselves or to people that we know, or just to large groups of people we don't know, but we feel that it's morally wrong that things that are happening are happening at all to those people. So what do we do with that anger? And for most of us, there's two things that are happening. Either we're just stuffing the anger down, in which case anger then transforms into rage because it's unexpressed. So it's just festering and eating away at us. So that's not healthy for us physically, but it's also not healthy in terms of the function that anger plays within us individually, but also within us collectively. Like, anger wouldn't be an emotion that we could access as human beings unless it had a function, a purpose, unless it was able to point us in a different direction, guide us, move us along a path. I think of anger as expressing in two ways. It can either be fuel that's added to a fire, or it can be the ways in which we direct the course of that fire. And so when we're not expressing our anger and it turns inward on ourselves as rage, when it does eventually come out, it generally comes out as fuel on the fire. So we don't really have any control over how we're expressing that anger because it's been stifled and pent up for so long, it just kind of all comes out at once, which is generally not good for us and generally not good for whoever's on the receiving end of it. When we start to work more consciously with our anger, though, giving ourselves permission to actually be angry, to have the right to be angry, to be willing to learn how to practice expressing our anger, knowing full well that when we're first practicing our anger, it's going to come out all messy, probably, right? We're going to hurt people unintentionally. We're going to do things that embarrass ourselves. We're going to feel bad about the way that we express ourselves. But that's all part of the learning curve if we want to be able to eventually come to the point where we're expressing our anger effectively and we're using it to channel our creativity. We're using it to direct the course of that creative fire as opposed to just adding fuel to the fire and letting it burn out of control. So for most of us, we're dealing with all kinds of systems that say that anger for a woman is something that we shouldn't express. Whether that's like within our family, we hear stories like we should be seen and not heard, or we're explicitly told by family members not to raise our voice, or it's just the subtle message that we get from society, from the media, that is continuously telling us what it means to be a woman, how a woman should behave, what she should look like, the way that her voice should sound, how she should carry herself, how she should respond to the injustices in the world, right? So there's all this messaging that basically is denying us a voice. And then, of course, a woman without a voice is generally an angry woman. So when the anger starts to come out, it doesn't usually come out in a way that's very effective, either for her or for those that she's sharing her feelings with. And the reason for that is that if we're constantly being told that we're not allowed to be angry, and then we get really angry because we've been like silencing ourselves our whole lives, and then it finally comes out and we like, bleh, and we just vomit everything up, we end up actually expressing our anger in the very ways that we're angry about other people expressing their anger. So if somebody's silencing me, my instinct, if I'm just trying to find my own anger and express my unique perspective in the world, and I'm so riled up because I feel like I haven't had a voice, when I do try to give myself a voice, I inevitably end up silencing somebody else in the process. So what we really want to try to do is to work with our anger as a teacher to be able to identify, first of all, like, what is it that I'm really angry about? Why am I angry? Like, we might have a chronic underlying sense of anger that's just a theme running through our lives, or it could be for a period of time in our lives, we're extremely angry and we're not really sure why. Maybe something's totally out of control. Maybe our relationship's really out of control. Maybe our finances are really out of control. Maybe our health is really out of control. And so that chronic underlying condition has resulted in this sort of stifled anger that has now kind of become our normal way of being. And every once in a while, it's like, we lash out and we see it rear its ugly head because we're not actually addressing the fact that we're really pissed off. And we're not doing anything about the fact that we're really pissed off. We're just shoving it down and shoving it down and shoving it down. So recognizing, first of all, like, are we dealing with a chronic underlying condition of anger, or are we just currently angry about a particular situation, or maybe we don't even have any relationship to our anger at all. Maybe we think we're the kind of person who, I don't get angry. I don't spend time with angry people. And it's like, really, I don't know anybody who's not angry, especially today in 2018 in the United States. I don't know how you could not be angry. So like, just notice what your reaction is to anger, because if you've got stories about how you're not an angry person, you don't associate with angry people, that's a clear indication that you're not connected to your own anger. And if we're not connected to our own anger, we're not connected to our creativity in its fullest capacity, because our creativity is an expression of our emotional nature, and anger is a necessary emotion for us to have, right? We should be angry when we're not heard. We should be angry when we're not seen. So first, identifying what our relationship is to anger right now in the present moment. Maybe historically our relationship to anger was different than it is right now. Maybe we have a greater sense of awareness around our anger, or we have a more felt sense, experience of anger right now in our lives than we have in the past. Just starting to document, track that, starting to bring into our conscious awareness, like, what is my experience of anger? What is my relationship to my own anger? And then starting to look at ourselves like, who am I when I'm angry? And for most of us, I think that we have an idea in our mind of becoming a totally different person when we're angry. And for most of us, we have a lot of judgment about that. And that judgment is a direct relationship to the fact that we live in a culture in which a patriarchal society says it's not okay for a woman to be angry. So not only do we like shove down our feelings, then when they come out, we instinctively feel guilty and ashamed and embarrassed about our anger, because that's what the culture has told us we should feel. So we're kind of adding insult to injury here. It's like, not only am I not allowed to express myself, but then when I do, I'm a really bad person. So now I've got to go into hiding again. I've got to swallow it all up again. And so this is our primary motivation for wanting to transform our anger into art, because our art becomes the outlet. It becomes the voice for our anger. Now we don't have to be like the angry lady yelling and screaming that then everybody else can say, oh, see, this is why you shouldn't be angry, right? And then feel bad about who we are. We can channel that energy into a creative body of work. So if we're going to start to channel our anger into a creative body of work, whether it's a particular piece, like right now, you might be really irate about what's going on politically. You might be really irate about what's going on environmentally. Whatever it is that has got you really riled up, we can use anger in its expression as the teacher or ally that helps to identify what our boundaries are, what our moral, ethical boundaries are, and the values that we hold, what's most meaningful for us. We can see like the circumstances and situations in our lives that make us really angry are a perfect portal for us to look into to see, why is it that this particular thing matters so much to me? Why am I angry enough to actually risk expressing myself when I don't normally express myself in anger under any other circumstance? So we've seen lots of anger being expressed over the Kavanaugh hearings, and women feeling like they're being silenced as they watch Christine Blasey Ford being silenced. So all the women who have been sexually abused, who didn't come forward, or who did come forward and then didn't get believed, or who are only now coming forward and are feeling like, well, what's the point if I'm not going to be believed anyway? If the whole world is just going to tell me I'm a liar, there's no point. I might as well just remain silent. So that individual rage, that's festering. That's millions and millions and millions of women who are all feeling silenced. And so collectively, the anger that we're feeling is not just our own. It's the anger of all women, but more importantly, it's the anger of the feminine. The anger of the repressed feminine that is now trying to express itself in a way that will allow for the dismantling of the patriarchal system that we're all entwined in, right? Being mindful that patriarchy is a system. It's not a gender-based framework. It's a system that both men and women participate in. So I am a part of the patriarchal system as much as Brett Kavanaugh is. The difference being that if I have a relationship to my anger and the feminine that is repressed within me, then I can extricate myself from the ways in which the system of patriarchy keeps me silenced. So in this way, as meaning makers, we really want to focus on our art and use our art as a vehicle of expression. And our art, there's no better place for us to put our anger than into our art. Because if we put our anger into our art, it's no longer about lashing out or spewing on or dumping on somebody who maybe doesn't deserve to be dumped on, but we're still getting it out of our system. We're moving it from the interior realm to the exterior realm. And each time one of us does that individually, we're actually helping to unlock that repressed feminine. We're helping to bring the feminine into consciousness collectively, each time one of us does that. So thinking again about the woman that you are when you're angry, and taking some time to really sort of fill in a visualization of that woman. Step outside yourself and observe yourself when you're angry. What are the names that you would call yourself? If you were an observer, what would you think of that woman? Do you respect her? Would you follow her lead? Would you listen to what she has to say? Would you believe her? Or would you totally dismiss her because of the way that she expresses herself? And then noticing, like, if you don't believe this woman, if you wouldn't trust her, why is that? This is where you're going to come up against how the patriarchy is alive and breathing in you every single day. So starting to really delve into that and to see, oh, well, the reason I don't trust her is because I don't trust anyone who's angry, because I don't know anyone who's been angry that I could trust. So now we're starting to get into, well, okay, what might it look like for me to have a role model of an angry woman that I actually trusted, that I wanted to follow, who I believe was righteous? What does that look like? What does it feel like? Do I know anyone who's doing that? How can I start to embody that myself? What are the qualities or characteristics that this woman is demonstrating that I feel I'm lacking in myself? And why am I lacking those things? What happened? How come I couldn't access that? Was it because I didn't have a model for it? Or did it just not occur to me that it could be channeled in that way? Because I've never seen anyone do it before, not even just like a model in my own life. Just no woman ever has demonstrated it that way. So as we start to work on transforming our anger into our art, we have to think about disciplining ourselves. We have to make the conscious choice that in the moment when our anger rises up, oftentimes our anger is rising up in a moment when a boundary has been crossed. A line has been moved. And in some way, we no longer feel safe. We feel like we have to defend ourselves, or we feel like we're too exposed in some way, or we feel like we have to take a stand for something. It's like, no, I will not stand here and let you do this to that person. That's often the way an anger will arise. And so in that case, it's a value system or it's a belief system that we're coming up against. So each time you're tracking your anger, and you can even look back on this historically, if there's times in your life when you expressed anger and you felt a huge amount of guilt or shame or embarrassment around it, start recording those. What was the common ground in that? Like, why did you feel ashamed or embarrassed or guilty of your behavior in that moment? There was a value there somehow that got touched on that made you angry, most likely. Or if you see that historically there is no connection, or maybe like when you get angry, you never feel guilty about it. You feel really good every time you get angry. make notes of that as well so that you can start to have a conscious relationship to your experience of anger and how you express it. So disciplining ourselves to be able to channel our anger into our art, what we really want to be doing is starting to identify either where I've been hurt or where a value is being revealed to me, a value that I'm not embodying, a value that I hold dearly, but I'm not willing to actually put my stake in the ground and stand for it. Not because I don't want to, but maybe I didn't even know that I wasn't doing it. Or maybe I didn't know that I could do it, right? Sometimes it's just coming into our consciousness. And so the anger is the teacher that shows us, hey, this is something that really matters to you, and you can stand for it right now. Nothing has to change in your life, and you can take a stand for this. So those are two places where we've got an opportunity to create new work. We've got a way to engage with our art, whatever the art form is that we happen to be working with. So regardless of what the art form is, we might use the inspiration from our anger, the inspiration that, hey, this really hurt my feelings, and this is something that I really want to address. Maybe being able to identify that hurt feeling then turns into a poem. It turns into a body of work. It turns into a healing practice. It turns into a way of sharing with others who have a similar woundedness. Our anger, when it's identifying our values, another way that it can be expressed through our art is maybe we take a stand for something that we feel very strongly about, and we start to become more politically active and engaged. We start to take a different stance around the way in which we are a consumer in the world. We start to demonstrate how we're using our money as a way to reflect what we value. Our whole life becomes our art in that sense. So rather than feeling like every time we're enraged over something that's happening, oftentimes what we're enraged about is there's something terrible happening on the global political scene, and we're observing how other people are responding, and our rage is triggered because they're not responding the way that we're responding. Our values and beliefs are not aligned with one another. And oftentimes we feel as though the only way for us to effectively make change in the world is for us to get them to see things differently. But most of the time, people are not going to see things differently if we just argue at them and say, hey, you should take our side and see it this way, right? Because that's keeping us trapped in duality. It's keeping us on the shore. It's us against them, your viewpoint versus my viewpoint, right? When we're operating from the soul, though, and we're in the ocean, everything is about creating what doesn't already exist, making what is unknown inside of us and bringing it forth into the world. So our art is the only way that we can do that. Having an argument with somebody generally doesn't bring into the conversation things that are unknown. It tends to bring forward what we already know. We say the same arguments over and over again that we've been saying or others have been saying, right? And then it's just a he said, she said thing. When we really tap into our unknown, though, we start to get curious about our anger, and we start to say, why is it that this thing just repeatedly annoys the shit out of me? Why is this thing such a craw in my hat? Like, why is this so important to me? And the more we really start to dive into that, we really start to reflect on that. We start to uncover the one thing that's inside of us that might not be available in the world unless we're the ones that bring it forth. So now suddenly, instead of me needing to convince somebody else of my belief systems or the things that I find meaningful and valuable, now it's about focusing on understanding that thing that's inside of me that just gets triggered every time this scenario happens, and like really wanting to dive into that and to explore it. What is it that's so important to me about that? And then starting to really take that apart, dissect it, really interrogate what's going on here. And then that interrogation becomes a body of work, whether it's in written form, maybe we visualize it in some way through symbolism, we create a body of work around it, maybe we create a product or a service out of it. There's all kinds of ways that we can bring that into expression. So for somebody who was really upset about new ticky-tacky houses being built in their neighborhood and sort of the countryside disappearing and just becoming suburbanized or whatever, maybe for them, they decided that it was really important that they made their house a totally unique, recycled, upcycled, repurposed house so that it didn't look like anybody else's house anywhere near them, right? That in and of itself is the statement. That person doesn't have to have an argument with someone and convince them why suburban ticky-tacky houses are a problem for them, right? Or what they're doing to the planet, or why they make environments ugly, or whatever it is, right? They don't even have to have that argument. Their house becomes the argument. And the very commitment that they make to that project, to just continuously being engaged with this inquiry around, why does this matter to me? It matters to me that I take a stand for this, and this is how I take a stand for it. So their life, their home, their lifestyle becomes their art, and it becomes their statement. In that way, rather than, you know, just going to the local town hall meeting and arguing about subdivision sprawl or whatever, and gentrification or whatever, and throwing fuel on the fire with anger, suddenly anger is transformed into art because it's been given some a place to be channeled, and it takes our focus and our attention, but we're able to easily discipline ourselves because we've made the connection with why it matters that we do. So your call to action, I want you to think about who you are as a woman. And I want you to visualize the kind of woman that you really want to be. So maybe there's already role models of women that you know that you really aspire to being, and you might be sort of drawing from those role models and kind of piecing something together. You might even want to think about yourself 10 years from now and say, well, who would I like to be in 10 years? But I want you to paint a picture of who it is that you want to be as a woman. And I want you to really think closely about, how does anger factor into that woman's life? How does she work with her anger? How does she express her anger? And then share it with us when you're done. Okay, have a great week.